All right, we are live. Actually, I was just doing a live, so I apologize if any of you guys were watching that. I'm actually just getting over a cold, so my voice was like pretty cracking up, so I had to get something to drink so I can actually go ahead and do this whole video. But let's kind of start this thing off. So this particular live show is going to be about the video where I created what's called Saguto Golf Messes Up Hogan's Swing. So the video obviously has been popping off for our particular channel over the last couple of days, and it's gotten a lot of positive feedback and it's gotten a lot of negative feedback. So what I wanted to do in this particular live show was I actually wanted to address the video itself. I'm going to re-go over the criticism that I have of Saguto Golf. And then also there's lots of comments that I want to also address as well, so that everyone who's watching this channel is all on the same page. And hopefully this will bring some of you guys value who end up watching this. So also, if you want to ask questions, you can do so. Just make sure to do it in the chat. And then from there, I'll actually end up answering them if there's any questions in the chat towards the end of this. But let's go straight into the video. Okay, so let's start off with what the video was all about. So Saguto Golf created this video, and the main purpose of the video was going to be for amateur golfers who were struggling with low point or struggling with contact control. More specifically, I'm assuming people who were struggling with shifting their weight too far off the golf ball to the right side and then kind of getting stuck back there, and then basically having maybe a low point behind the ball, ducking the golf ball, hitting up on the golf ball, all those good things. That's kind of who the video was made for. So then his particular advice was, you want to take the center of the pelvis, and throughout the whole backswing constantly, you want to shift the center of the pelvis forward as you are rotating the pelvis in a clockwise rotation for a right-handed golfer. That's what he's talking about in this particular video. Now, he brings up people like Ben Hogan as kind of his reference or his evidence that this is what you should do. He says that Hogan, as you can clearly see with the picture that he brought up, that Hogan actually at the top of the swing had the center of the pelvis ahead of where it was at setup. So because Hogan is doing this, you should also do this. If you can do this, you're going to guarantee that your low point is always going to be in the same place. And that was essentially his video. So now let's start to get into kind of my criticisms of the video. And I think the first part is going to be around Ben Hogan. That was kind of the main criticism for the first part. So when you actually take a look at Ben Hogan's golf swing, you actually do not see the center of the pelvis shift constantly forward towards the lead foot throughout the backswing. That's just not what he does. Now, does he shift off the golf ball quite a lot? No, he doesn't do that also as well, right? He's actually quite centered of a pivot. Maybe even you could call him like a lead post pivot type of player. But absolutely, when it comes to pressure and the center of the pelvis, there's going to be a slight shift off the golf ball initially. And then from there, when the hands are getting right around shoulder height on the backswing, or maybe even just slightly before that, that's when you're seeing the center of the pelvis starting to shift more so towards the lead foot. And then at the top of the swing, the center of pelvis is actually ahead of where it was at setup. That I agree with. But the most important key point there is the center of the pelvis is actually not shifting constantly forward throughout the backswing, like Saguto says when it comes to Ben Hogan. So if we can take that as being a fact, which it is, just go watch Ben Hogan's golf swing. If that is a fact, then already what he's saying is not necessarily true. So we can take his video as maybe he's just saying this as a feeling and not necessarily as the reality. This is actually what you should do. Now, when I watch this video, I am under the impression that this is what he truly believes you should actually do. And this is not just a feeling he's talking about, but maybe I could be wrong. I'd have to talk to him, but that's that when it comes to the Ben Hogan side. Now, also, the other criticism I have is, well, let's say we take an amateur golfer that actually physically does his advice. Like actually, when you video the golf swing, they see that center of the pelvis shifting constantly forward throughout the backswing. What would potentially happen? Well, oftentimes when you see players do that, you're going to see them at the top of the golf swing. Yes, the center of pelvis is shifted constantly forward, but typically in early transition, you then see the center of pelvis actually shift backwards closer to the trail foot. And then around impact, they typically, for most of those players, are going to be still heavily on the trail side when it comes to pressure. And then somewhere post-impact, maybe when the hands are at hip height on the follow-through, then you start to see the pressure shift back forward again. So it's basically kind of similar to a driver swing where you get the pressure shifted early, then you kind of shift back, then post-impact, you start to shift forward again. That's kind of what they're doing. But, a driver swing, we're trying to get the low point behind the ball and hit up on the ball typically. That's why you see the pressure trace in that particular pattern. You don't necessarily want to do that with the irons as severe as you would with the driver. So that's my criticism as well. So if people, amateur golfers, take it so literally, just like he said, that's most likely the pattern of golf swing they're going to see. Now, also, another criticism I had to that is, let's just say that the player did shift that center of the pelvis forward, and for whatever magical reason, they actually didn't shift backwards, but they just kept it there throughout the downswing. If anything, shifted more forward. He said that if you get your center of the pelvis to move the way that he said, you're always going to have consistent low point. So my criticism there is you're assuming that low point is tied to where the center of the pelvis is at impact, which is not necessarily tied there. Now, I think it's definitely a strong correlator where the center of the pelvis is, absolutely. I think the more and more the center of pelvis is behind the ball, the more difficult it is to get low point actually at the ball or ahead. But it's not the sole correlator when it comes to low point. You have to remember the sternum also is a correlator when it comes to low point. So I could shift that center of the pelvis way forward, but then tilt the upper body like this massively and get the sternum really far behind the center of the pelvis. And I can still actually hit behind the ball and get a low point behind the ball if I do a motion like that. So sternum also is a correlator. Now, not only is sternum a correlator, you could also argue that the overall hand path movement and the overall twisting of the shaft movement through the wrists and the forearms, those would also be heavy correlators to where the low point is going to be, right? So if the wrists go down cock or upper cock, that can affect where the low point would be. If it starts to go this way or this way with the wrist, that can affect where low point would be. If the hands start to loop behind you or out towards the ball, that could also affect where low point could be. So those would be very strong correlators when it comes to low point as well. So my criticism is, that comment alone, if you get your center of pelvis to where he says you to be, and then you have a consistent low point all the time, that's just factually incorrect if you understand how the body moves, right? There's other correlators besides where the center of the pelvis is. So even if the center of pelvis is forward, I can actually tilt the upper body. I can also move the hands more behind, and I can still get a low point behind the ball and duff the ball. So it's not the full picture is my criticism. Now, getting into maybe the strong points for him when it comes to the video, well, you can have clients who actually shift the center of the pelvis too far off the golf ball. And this video, for them attempting to do what he says as a feeling, could actually really help that client get into a position where they're a lot more neutral at the pelvis, and they can actually get low point potentially much more where it should be, either at the ball or slightly ahead, and actually hit the golf ball a whole lot better. So I absolutely agree with that point. If people who have a severe issue of sliding off the golf ball, this could be a very helpful video. Now, the issue with this, another criticism I have is, even though it could be very helpful, it's for a specific person who has a specific issue. What if that person gets back to neutral, but then continues to do a motion and then starts to overdo it and is now hitting the golf ball worse? What do you do for that particular player, right? So the criticism is there's not really any measurable checkpoints. There's no okay zone of what is good, what is bad. So when you have a client actually doing what they tell you to do, and then they overdo it, they don't know how to actually get back to the okay zone because they don't even know what the okay zone is, right? So that's a pretty big criticism that I had when it came to Saguto golf. So to kind of wrap up, when it comes to my criticisms, first and foremost, kind of the Ben Hogan concept right there. You're not seeing the center of the pelvis shift consistently forward throughout the whole backswing with Ben Hogan. That's the first criticism. If you actually have an amateur golfer for real shift the center of the pelvis forward throughout the whole backswing, you're probably going to find that amateur golfer actually slide the center of the pelvis actually back towards the trail side on the downswing, which means that they're probably not going to have a good low point. Then from there, even if a golfer can shift their center of the pelvis forward and keep it there on the downswing, which is very difficult, but even if they could, that still doesn't mean that low point is going to be guaranteed, because low point is not just where the center of the pelvis is. Low point is also correlated to where the sternum is, and it's also correlated to where the hands are moving towards, and it's also correlated to kind of where the wrists are moving the club shaft towards. So just because your center of pelvis is in the okay spot, that does not guarantee that your low point will be in the good spot. And then the last criticism, I think it was more so just not the measurable checkpoints, right? So if you have a client actually doing this and they do get better, but then they start to overdo it, there's no real okay zone to where they could be. Those are kind of the criticisms that I had of this particular video. And then last but not least, when it comes to kind of the good parts of the video, I do think for a specific player who is really struggling with swaying the center of the pelvis off the golf ball, maybe even get like a reverse pivot, this video, if the player attempts to do what he says as a feel, they could get a whole lot better. Now, that doesn't mean that they're actually doing what he says, that they're just feeling that they're doing what he says. And then ultimately, the actual position of the swing is going to be relatively neutral. So that would be kind of the good thing about that. All right, so now let's start to address some of the questions. And I know we have some people watching right now. So if you guys want to ask your questions, definitely make sure to go ahead and do so. But let's go over some of the comments real quick. And let's go over the first one. So this is from David Fraser. Do you bash all instructors or just a selection to drive your agenda? So I do apologize if the video came across as bashing the instructor. I do apologize. I personally thought that the video came across as kind of professional criticism, just because I wasn't just, bashing him for no reason. Like, oh, I just don't like his character. I don't just like his attitude. I thought I was particularly criticizing specific points of the mechanics that he was teaching. So to me, I feel like that's more of a professional criticism and not necessarily bashing a person. So I do apologize if it came across that way. That wasn't my personal intention, but if you really feel that, that's the beauty of YouTube, right? Just go to another YouTube channel. Don't ignore me completely, please, because I don't want to disturb you. So that's the first one. Okay, second, let's go into another criticism here. So with these comments, there wasn't really too many criticisms when it comes to the actual mechanics. So I think that most people probably agreed with me on that. But here's one. I've been following Saguto Golf for building my swing, but I did not try to do this move more than a day. I do think you're correct here. Sorry, that's not criticism. That's a good comment. I'll skip that one. Let me go to criticism one. Okay, Saguto is a stack and tilt instructor. He said it himself. So I think this is a quite interesting comment. So I do agree that he's a stack and tilt instructor, and I actually did know this before I created the first video of him, just because, if you go to his channel, one of the first videos you'll see on the channel is him doing a collaboration with a stack and tilt instructor. So obviously I knew he was a stack and tilt instructor, but just because he's a stack and tilt instructor does not mean that what he's saying is correct, right? Because I don't think any stack and tilt instructor that has any merit talks about the center of the pelvis consistently shifting forward throughout the whole backswing. I haven't heard any of them talk that way. Now, most of them talk about kind of like a lead post pivot, which means that you're kind of posting around the lead side. But even those instructors, if you actually measure the pressure actually would be shifting a slight bit to the right side initially throughout the early part of the backswing before it starts to shift back to the forward swing. So yes, I know he's a stack and tilt instructor, but for the most part, that doesn't neglect kind of my main point of the video. Okay, I'm going to get into the last one, and I think we have actually someone at our door that I got to go. It's a package, most likely. So let me get into this last one. Saguto obviously has a unique personality and some funny one-liners. I've incorporated some, but not all of his tips with great success, to each their own. So I think this really sums up maybe the main viewers of Saguto Golf. First and foremost, if you guys are getting better and you guys are enjoying it and you guys are having fun, don't watch this video. Don't watch this channel, because this channel is not necessarily going to teach you in the same way that this person would be teaching you. So I think it's really important to understand that this channel is definitely made for people that are a little bit more logical thinking and that are a little bit more, we call them golf nerds, is what we call them in our Japanese business. But for the most part, that's who this channel is really for. So I apologize. If you're getting good advice from him and you're doing well, stick to watching his channel. Don't watch our channel. I'm sure it may be popped up on the sidebar. I apologize. That's just what YouTube does. But maybe next time you see QB Golf America, just skip it, right? Don't even watch us. It's not going to hurt my feelings. So I think that pretty much wraps up this live show. So watch through this live show a few more times. I think you guys will have a great understanding of exactly kind of my points on all these things. Also, feel free to comment as much as you guys want, and I'll probably be doing other live streams in the future. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.